Hi, welcome back to our class in rhetorical theory. Let's talk today about Plato and Cicero. Up to this point, we've talked probably more about Aristotle than anybody else and Aristotelian ideas of rhetoric, though we've mentioned both of these other figures. But let's go in a little more depth today because Plato preceded Aristotle. Aristotle was his student, but Plato himself wasn't, he had a lot of interests. So did Aristotle for that matter. But Plato's primary works were not about rhetoric per se, though he had a lot to say about it. Cicero wrote very much about rhetoric. In fact, there's quite a compendium of works of his, a very prolific writer. All right. Socrates' star student was Plato in the, what do we call this, the genealogy of philosophical mentoring. And Plato admired his teacher quite a bit, was distraught at his death, and there's I should have got a slide for you, but a famous picture of Socrates holding up a cup and preparing to drink the cup of poison. And Plato was young when this happened, but the artist set Plato at the foot of the bed where Socrates was seated, and showed him as an old man just kind of getting depressed with the death of his mentor here. Kind of an interesting interpretation of that event. Hemlock, yes, that's what Socrates was forced to drink, which made his basically start shutting down your nervous system, and his legs started to go numb, so he's sitting in the bed there, but his upper torso was still active enough, and he had people there massaging him, getting the stuff to move around through his bloodstream throughout his body, and before long it affects the lungs and the heart, and you peacefully pass away. And Plato, in his own writings, and I mentioned three of them here, the Gorgias, the Phaedrus, and the Republic is most famous one. Plato promoted, first of all, he condemned sophism. He had seen the work of the sophists throughout Athens, the traveling teachers that taught you how to persuade people, that taught the art of rhetoric for money, and disapproved of them. And Plato was the one who wrote the most about them in the Gorgias. And Gorgias was, of course, as we learned, one of the primary sophists. And within the Gorgias, Plato really complains that you're not teaching ethics, Gorgias. What are we going to do about this? And there's a key character in Gorgias named Callicles. And Callicles steps up in this dialogue. It's literally a play. It would read like a play with the person's name, and you're going to be reading this in Phaedrus. And Gorgias gets quiet. He defends himself for a little bit against, actually it's Socrates that's arguing with him. It's always, you could think of Socrates in Plato's writings as Plato's puppet. Plato always has Socrates say everything. He never inserts himself into these theater-like dialogues that read like a script. And Gorgias finally has nothing really to say about ethics, but Callicles does step up and goes into a very lengthy speech, a diatribe even, that's a type of speech, about ethics. And Callicles comes up with the idea that might makes right. You've heard that the powerful have the right to rule over the weaker, and makes a pretty strong case for that this is true. And Callicles was a rich, wealthy, influential Athenian, and this view espoused in the Gorgias that Plato explains through Socrates, it's getting confusing, isn't it, is known as Callicleanism. And there's very much an antisocial, sociopathic type view of this, that just because I'm stronger than you, because I have more money, because I hire people that I can just give them a nod and they will put you to death, because I have the ability to hire lawyers and get what I want and let you lose what you want because you can't hire good lawyers, that gives me the right to do all of these things. Most of us today would say, no, we disagree with that philosophy and that way of living. Yet that is still very much alive in our modern society today. Well, this is kind of the central argument within the Gorgias, and Socrates finally takes the stage in the Gorgias and says, no, here's why you can't do all that, Callicles. And as I read Gorgias, I feel like Socrates' arguments against it just aren't convincing Callicles. And finally Socrates says towards the end, and don't forget, you're going to have to answer to the gods for all the evil that you've done. And even that probably doesn't impress Callicles. So the book ends kind of in a pessimistic way. But it's one of the first treatments of ethics, especially within rhetoric. Within Callicles' student Paulus was there, and Paulus was learning rhetoric. Paulus means colt, which is kind of an interesting name that Plato picked for him. In the Phaedrus, we're looking at, well, let me skip and talk about the Republic a little bit. And the slide here says Plato promoted dialectic. Dialectic is a method, and we've talked about this a little bit already, for discovering truth. And scientific argumentation should be dialectic, should be the pure form of dialectic. Mathematics is a symbolic form of dialectic, in a sense. So, and these dialogues that Plato writes are dialectic in nature, question and answering, trying to get at the truth. And he's trying to model the very art of learning truth that he was promoting. In the Phaedrus, Plato deals with rhetoric specifically. Now, I've read in a number of philosophical sources arguments between philosophers about what does the Phaedrus mean? What does love stand for? It's an allegory. Plato is a very creative writer, very artistic. And yes, when you read his writings, you need to look between the lines. You need to look for metaphors and allegories. And here in this one, love is the key idea that it's about. You're reading this and you'll see that. And Plato talks about three kinds of lovers and which is more preferable, and in this dialogue. Well, in this case, love is an allegory for rhetoric. Kind of the same lines of thinking of seduction in one case, of true love, of the right kind of love, and then there's the non-lover. And so he gives three speeches here. One is delivered by Phaedrus himself, who's reading a speech by Lysias from a scroll that he's got hidden under his toga. And of course there's an old joke about that. And then the second one is about given by Socrates, where he says, well, I think I can beat that speech. And he has a different view of love in this case. And then finally, Socrates says, I just spoke evil of one of the gods, the god of love, and my monitor spirit, the little muse, whatever you want to call that Socrates mentions now and then, has warned him. And so Socrates does another speech in praise of a true love, a noble love. And as we learn here, these are three kinds of rhetoric, three ways to be persuasive. And one is the non-lover, we'll see in our reading by Richard Weaver, is essentially like scientific discourse, just the facts, just the truth. I'm not even going to put emotion in my voice. I'm just going to tell you how it is. And even I will wear my white lab coat here to present this truth to you. And how do you argue with a scientist in a white lab coat? Well, very dialectically, really. They need to be convinced through logical argumentation, through other research. But this is a kind of persuasion that often is very powerful, very effective, very evident in today's world. And what Plato would like to get at with this is this kind of way of presenting rhetoric, of presenting truth, is not always what it seems. This scientist who's pretending to be disinterested actually may be fairly manipulative. Okay, the second type is the evil lover, or the base lover. In this translation you're reading, I believe. And the base lover wants what they want, and they are persuading you to do something that is going to be in their best interests, not necessarily yours, and probably not necessarily yours at all. And I've got a picture here of a fellow, advance one slide, and this is one of his advertisements. His name's Harry Dent, and in my spare time I study economics. I'm particularly interested in the rhetoric of economics, which pretends to be this very scientific field trying to predict the future of our economy. And so this fellow comes along, Harry Dent. He's got ads regularly. I see them on the various websites that I look at. And in each one of these, he's predicting something's going to happen in the future. And if you just read his book, you'll understand what that is, agree with him, and you will make investments that will get you very wealthy. Well, the problem is, for about 12 years now that I've been reading pretty deeply about economics, Harry Dent's been there all along, Harvard researcher. Yeah, he probably got his degree from Harvard. He's intelligent, yeah, very bright, very intelligent, very successful. But I think he's successful at selling books and selling you plans to invest your money, not necessarily that he necessarily has made a lot of money. And I've also noticed over the 12 years, his predictions just don't really come true. Or they'll come true 7 years later and he'll say, see, I was right. And that's not what investors need in terms of predicting the future. So is he the base lover from this prior slide? And yeah, I think you could call him that. And I could change my mind if I ever meet him face to face and really look into his enterprise, but I think really it is an enterprise designed to make money for him at the expense of other people. And then finally there's the noble lover. Here we have with Martin Luther King, who gave his life for the cause in the 1960s, was well aware of the risks of being assassinated by somebody, and held up for us a vision of a better life for all of us. And so these are the three lovers that Plato's talking about, and look for them today. They're still out there. All three types are still there. Beware of those first two. Scientists, sometimes they're just doing really good science and they're presenting material as the best they can. But even science has a rhetoric about it, a sub-branch in our field, and we have shown quite often that the rhetoric of science is very powerful and can really lead a lot of people astray, in a sense. The slick salesman, motivational speaker, yeah, always beware of them. Let them inspire you. I like reading Robert Kiyosaki. He could be put into this category, although he may be somewhere in between all three of these. I kind of like him still. I know a lot of people that don't, but his ideas, he's just really encouraging people to be entrepreneurs and to create a more prosperous life for yourself, and I can appreciate that. He sells a lot of books too. Okay, moving on here to Cicero. Plato was the teacher to Aristotle, and Aristotle was much more concerned about practicalities of life, and thus his teachings on rhetoric and on natural science are just amazing. Plato was more of the philosopher, not really a rhetorician so much, and taught about rhetoric, but really did more to warn us about rhetoric than teach us how to do good rhetoric. What he did show was the dialectic method that is superior. His ideal was expressed in his book, The Republic, of a nation that was run by philosopher kings, very well educated people who had the power of government yet wanted the best for all of the people. Didn't work out that way, and Alexander conquered Greece, not Alexander, Philip of Macedon, and his empire was taken over by Alexander, and Plato's Republic never came to be. Cicero came along during the Roman Republic, and the ideals of Greek and Athenian rhetoric and politics were enhanced, or Rome was enhanced by these ideas, and Cicero was just a natural at rhetoric. From an early age, at age 20, he wrote a book called De Inventione, on invention. And we've already read an excerpt from that book in our class where he explains about the stasis levels and argumentation. This was legal theory. This is still taught in law schools. And in fact, that version of, or the example of it that I put up for you came from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, from their law school. His stuff is very relevant. You can see the list of books he wrote there. This is for sale for $290. I'd be tempted to buy something like that just to have it on my shelf, although I'm not sure that I could ever read through all of them at this age. And so Cicero was just a brilliant person, and he wrote about what he learned and expounded on almost everybody's ideas. He probably wrote another book on rhetorical practice called Rhetorica ad Herennium. And he disavowed this book later, as well as De Inventione. He said he never wrote those, probably because they were just more immature versions, but they were kind of along the lines of what Aristotle wrote, study notes for people that were very practical in nature, that you could lecture from, but not really the elegant writing that you see in Cicero's other works, where he has characters like Plato, inspired by Plato. He wrote dialogues with characters discussing pros and cons of whatever subject he's talking about. And he wrote some of the best things about rhetoric that we've got today. He was later murdered by Mark Antony, who seized power and turned it over to Julius Caesar's nephew, I think Caesar Augustus. And Caesar Augustus turned Rome from a republic, very slowly, very sneakily, into an empire. And he was the emperor, and thus ended the need for rhetoric. Because when you have an emperor, or a king, or a despotic ruler of any type, you just don't go down to the plaza downtown and start talking about politics and telling people what we ought to do about it, because you'll quickly be arrested, and that'll probably be the end of you in many cases. What Cicero taught us about rhetoric were just two things I want to show here. First of all, the purposes of rhetoric, and he clarified this. It's to inform people. Well, there might be your scientific discourse right there, and that's what professors ought to be doing. We're informing our classes, challenging, and at some point there, and I've said this a lot, there is no zero on a continuum of persuasion from informing people all the way to being as persuasive as you can possibly be. To inform somebody is to share with them a view that is going to naturally lead you towards a certain leaning or a certain opinion about the matter you've been informed about, until you're informed on both sides and really get there to make a decision. Most efforts to inform you have a motive behind them. So to inform is one purpose of rhetoric, to persuade, obviously, the persuasive speech. We could call this forensic speaking. In the debate team, it's known as forensics, the entire art of it, forensics, just debating and trying to win an argument and show that my version of what we're arguing about here is more likely to be true than yours. And judges literally vote, they count the number of arguments they have. They're supposed to weigh the strength of the gravity of each of these arguments, but often in forensics and debate teams, they're doing the best they can just to count them, because debaters have learned to speak so fast to get more arguments on the scale in your allotted minutes in certain kinds of debate. And then finally, to entertain. We use rhetoric to entertain. Yet even in entertaining, often we're given a worldview that we can choose to adopt. Cicero also taught us about the 5 canons of rhetoric, really organized the discipline. And memory, invention, delivery, arrangement, and style. And I'll take credit, probably one of many, for this little acronym, MIDAS. That helped me remember it when I was in college. And I just played around with the letters, came up with that, and realized, wow, that's nice. The golden touch. You can, and rhetoric provides you for that. Memory, of course, is memorizing what you're going to say so you're not stumbling across your words like I often do. Invention is, what are you going to say? Where do arguments come from? We've studied this already, looking at topical logics. Arrangement would have to do with stasis theory. What do you talk about first? What do you talk about next? Those types of things. Your delivery is that theatrical performance of a speech. A theatrical performance of a movie designed to persuade, like this new children's movie out about Peter Rabbit. Came out a couple of years ago. And the first time I saw that, I thought, oh my gosh, this is about socialism. The rabbits have the right to go into the garden of the farmer and eat the vegetables, and the farmer's being mean to them and keeping them out of the garden and actually getting violent with them, and this isn't right. And we have the woman, the writer, who comes along and helps the rabbits to basically take over the garden. Well, isn't that an interesting movie? Right after the election, where socialism is a growing force here as I speak in 2019 in the United States of America. And we have a children's movie that is teaching a philosophy of socialism. So even in movies, we have a delivery, a very sophisticated delivery style for any message that Cicero could only have imagined. Or perhaps he was very familiar with it in the Greek and Italian theater. And style, Cicero wrote a lot about style, the ultimate manual on writing style in Latin, language style. A lot to say about this. Use the right words makes such a difference as compared to stumbling over what you're trying to say and not having the vocabulary to say it in the right way, not bringing an artistry into your speech. And you combine that with just a sensible arrangement of your ideas, an excellent delivery with a voice starting out that's loud enough for everybody to hear, that is articulate, that enunciates properly so people can understand your words. The invention of ideas that will really get through to, as Aristotle taught us, the given situation, the people and the times they live in, and just the right arguments that speak to their hearts, and then being able to remember it all and deliver it fluently, eloquently, and in a performative style that holds people's attention. Cicero brought it all together for us. Of course, the sophists were doing all that and trying to teach people how to do it, I think, but most of them just picked up Plato called it a knack. You've got the knack for oratory and rhetoric, and it's just kind of a natural talent that practice helps develop. But what about the rest of us, people like me that don't have that knack, that have had to study it, have had to practice theater, and still I'll never be as good as lecturer as some of my colleagues, some good friends that I have. I just enjoy listening to them teach and speak. But all of us can get better at rhetoric, at persuasion, through study and through practice. The natural talent, that's great if you have it, but if you've got that talent and you study and practice, you'll go far. I have no concerns about that. But why study rhetoric? I was accepted into the PhD program at the University of Memphis in 1999, early 2000, finished up my master's degree. I have to back up. 1997, 1998 was when I finished up my master's degree in Syracuse and applied for PhD programs in rhetoric. That's what I wanted to study. And I was accepted into several, but I chose to go to the University of Memphis to study with John Angus Campbell, who had been highly recommended to me, and I had read some of his works. I was moving my family to Memphis. We had the van with the trailer full of everything we owned, our 2 kids, and we drove from Syracuse, New York, down to Memphis, Tennessee. And the day we got there, we put all our stuff in storage and didn't even have a place to live yet. We were going to meet with a realtor. And I talked to John on the phone, and he gave us the name of a realtor who was wonderful. And then John says, "Let me take you out to lunch." And so I met John for lunch there the first day in Memphis, and John had invited a colleague from the university, Thomas Darwin, and Tom also had studied rhetoric at the University of Texas and was very good with it. And we're sitting there at lunch that day, and I'll never forget this. John starts telling me about the movie Alien. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a horror movie back from the 80s. But in Alien, you see in the upper picture there this, and that's John's picture, but he always wore ties and suspenders. Little alien gets on the guy's face there and has inserted something down his throat, and their doctors on their spaceship are trying to get this thing off. And they finally do, and he seems to get better until later in the movie, this thing bursts out of his chest, and it's the monster, and it grows fast, and it starts killing people. And John said, studying rhetoric is like the movie Alien. And the study of it here at the university is like you're getting that thing on your face, and for a while you can't even see what's going on. I suppose there was a time when I'd even have trouble defining rhetoric, even after taking several classes in it. And but then it all starts settling into place, but something's growing inside of you. And that something, we have to be careful, because it can burst out and be this monster, this critic, this person who just is critical at everything they look at because they see all the rhetoric going on. It's just crystal clear to you. And I've had to temper that tendency in myself to be overly critical about people. You just heard me being critical of Harry Dent, and I had to follow that up with, maybe if I met him, I'd really like the guy. I've got to be careful about that. But what rhetoric brings to you, and I've just got a quick list here, I'll say one is prosperity. Once you're a student of rhetoric and a practitioner of rhetoric, things just start going well for you. You're able to persuade people, and what a skill that is. Job interviews are so much simpler when I go into a job interview recognizing that this is a rhetorical event here. I am trying to persuade very smart people that I'm a really good fit for this position. And just little things like, I came to an interview here at NAU. I had the wrong color shirt, and I realized that the night before the interview and went and bought a nice blue shirt that matches the NAU colors. I just wanted to look like I really fit in here. Of course, throughout the day I understood the kinds of things to talk about in the interview, what not to talk about too much in the interview. And I knew in my case I needed to talk about teaching. It's all about teaching, not all about my research and my plans and the books that I'm going to write and I'm going to impress you with all that. No, I'm trying to persuade sophisticated people here who see through it. And I wanted to show them that I can teach, and I'd love to be a teacher here in your department. So that prosperity does follow. When you've studied rhetoric, you can really see through all the bullshit out there in the world. And yes, rhetoric is always used as a synonym for bullshit. Well, there's a reason for that, and that's because there's a lot of it out there. But once you understand argumentation theory, have really grasped, where the argument becomes weak and the delivery starts to take over and somebody raises their voice and gets passionate, because clearly there's an argument embedded in that. You wouldn't feel so passionate about it if it wasn't true. But no, they're just acting. And if you look at the heart of the argument that they've just presented, it's a weak one. That's a probable argument. There's evidence to support it, but it's not strong enough here to make our good old scales of justice tip the direction they need to tip. So they add passion, they add anger, they add pictures of baby seals being clubbed by hunters and pictures of starving children. Pick your cause. And those are fair if you've got the goods in the argumentation, if you have the evidence, if you have the sound arguments, all that's good. But too many times it's all the fancy suit, the good-looking people with their perfect hair, their eloquence, their beautiful voices, and they're giving you a whole line of BS that you should really just turn off the TV at that point or walk out of the room. If the solid argumentation is not there, we must be aware of those things. When you study rhetoric, it's difficult to be fooled anymore. And unfortunately, you may not be fooled by some of the very causes you believe in. I became more critical of the Christian church that I've been a part of since I was a teenager, and literally got saved out of a life of budding crime and into a group of really solid young people that welcomed me as a friend, and I decided to change my life and live according to these principles. But further down the road, you see that, yeah, there's something very genuine there that has kept me in it, but there's also abuse going on. All sorts of abuse of power, of money, and the kind of things that turn people off and say the place is full of hypocrites, I'm done with it. Well, I've been fortunately able to see through it all and see the bad stuff, but also see there's something genuine that I'm still clinging to, and that keeps me going at times. But yeah, the other stuff, the power trips and all that, really don't have time for that in my life, and don't want to be embroiled in it anymore. So difficult to be fooled, but watch out. The causes you love may be shown for having some evil lovers, some base lovers, some even scientific lovers who aren't always what they seem. We really learn to appreciate the noble lovers when we study rhetoric. People, when they're persuading us and their argumentation is solid, they're appropriately passionate according to the cause, they're fabulous with their delivery, and they're winning people over to the cause, and it's fun to get on the bandwagon with a cause like this. And it's fun to read a good book that is explaining to you, here's how to have a better life, and every page you're turning, you're learning things and becoming a better person. You recognize that to so much a greater degree from studying rhetoric. So beware of the cynicism that can come along, and My last piece of advice with all that is learn to listen more than you talk. There's time to say a few words, a few key words, appropriately said, appropriately arranged, memorized, with good delivery, and become a rhetorician yourself in teaching others, younger people, people who are in need of what you know, how to have a better life, to do what's good for all of us. And listening is probably the key to getting other people to listen to you. And when they're ready to listen, and I remember John Campbell was so good about that. We'd sit at a big dinner party, and he would be quiet the whole evening. And after about 2 or 3 hours, when everybody else had kind of said everything that they felt was sensible, then John could talk, and he would fill us with wisdom that we've cherished to this day. Okay, sorry to go on a long rant there. Hope you've enjoyed this, and this is a worthwhile class you're in, and everything will start falling into place with you, maybe after the class is over, like it did with me. You have a great day, and we'll talk with you next time.